Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. There's more legislation getting filed. The Texas House is finally having some introductory hearings, not on specific legislation, but just to kind of organize in general, all part of walking more slowly through the process, which does present the potential for bottleneck at the end. But if conservatives continue to engage in the process, it will prevent much of that conservative policy that would die with a bottleneck to actually make its way through the process. And that's actually what we're going to focus on today. We are going to talk about how you can engage more in the Texas political process this session for the next 3 months. Let's get to the show. Before I get to a very specific list, and I'm going to give you very easy, actionable things that you can do. Okay. But before we get there, I'm going to give you a couple updates of what's going on. One, Shelley Luther filed a great bill that is going, for those of you who don't remember, Shelley Luther is the salon owner who opened her salon in the middle of COVID and was put in jail because of it. She has filed legislation that says if vaccine companies decide to advertise in Texas, then they are also liable. Okay. So you're either, if you're going to advertise this vaccine, you're liable, or you cannot advertise it. Great piece of legislation. And that actually fits really well with comments made by Representative James Frank in the first Public Health Committee. Let's go to this clip.
You yourself say there's a different risk reward on the spectrum, and yet we don't do anything other than tell people you need to get the vaccine. And oh, by the way, the pharmaceutical company has no liability because we have waived that. So they are at zero risk, although they are at tremendous benefit of encouraging these, right? It's unbelievable. It's a great business model, right? I get to manufacture it, you require it, and then I have no risk. That's a pretty impressive thing.
For those of you who just need a reminder in how this process works, specific legislation goes to these committees of topic. This would be the Public Health Committee, and the Public Health Committee is more conservative than it was last session. It has a higher floor and potentially a lower ceiling. And what I mean by that is it is a 1-vote majority committee. It had a 1-vote majority last session. So I don't know if it's a lower ceiling as much as it just still has a ceiling capped at the most moderate member, which is the chairman, Gary Van Dever, who is given the chairmanship of public health by Dustin Burrows. And so the other 6 members are much more conservative than the chairman is. And so for conservative policy in that committee, you will very quickly get to 6 votes. And then the question is going to be, are you able to get to that 7th, much needed 7th vote to actually get your piece of legislation moved out of committee in the process? I will give you one other good piece of news. House Bill 239. This is Valerie Swanson's bill prohibiting individuals from using bathrooms and other private spaces of the opposite sex in public buildings. Has 76 co-authors. It has 76 co-authors. Now, here's what that means. 76 of the 150 members of the legislature have said, I support this bill, which means publicly, if this bill shows up to the floor, I know it will become law, right? That indicates that there is no reason for the committee process to be used to thwart this piece of legislation becoming law. I do believe this bill will become law. I'm not taking it for granted. I'm just telling you, leadership would not have allowed some of their strongest lieutenants to sign on to this bill if they weren't ready to anticipate its passage this session, right? There's a lot of legislation that will protect women and girls, and there's a lot of legislation that will protect children as a whole from the transgender ideology. So all of that will get discussed, and this is just one of those bills. House Bill 239 by Valerie Swanson. I'm appreciative that Valerie Swanson has been willing to put in the effort to get all those signatures, and it is good news. I will tell you, one of the things that we have been hearing is since our episode with Representative Andy Hopper, this conversation about bathrooms has been significant. You saw the lieutenant governor come out in response within about a week of the show saying, hey, there's been reports about this 18-year-old girl or this young woman who was approached by a man. I'm not reading the quote right in front of me, so I'm telling you basically what the lieutenant governor said, which is that there's been this report that young women have been approached by men dressed like women in the restroom. We will not have that in the Texas Capitol. This is not going to happen. Ultimately, that decision looks to be the decision of the Preservation Board. And the Preservation Board is the people on the Preservation Board. There's a citizen appointed, and then there's Senator Charles Schwartner and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and then Speaker Dustin Burrows and Representative Charlie Geren and the governor, Greg Abbott. Those 6 people make up the Preservation Board. So I'm sure that with the Lieutenant Governor taking that position, there are conversations happening with the Preservation Board on what will be done to prevent men from entering women's spaces in the Texas Capitol. And then also this legislation, HB 239, would protect them in other public buildings like schools and, of course, any and all other public spaces. Now, unfortunately, HB 239, even if it passed into law, would not go into effect until September of this year. So the question the legislature is asking is, one, is there a way for us to protect women today? Can we protect their spaces now in the Capitol? And can we also make sure that we protect them statewide? HB 239 by Valerie Swanson. Now, I will say this. When it comes to this process and how things are moving, you have to understand that Dustin Burrows is working rather slow. Now, I will update these numbers on a regular basis. I'll probably give you these numbers every week for the next several weeks because they really do matter. In the Texas Senate, there have been 1,329 Senate bills. Now, this was the filing as of yesterday, okay? So as of yesterday, there had been 1,329 Senate bills filed. 1,773 Senate bills filed, and 1,329 of them have been referred to their respective committees, and that is the act of the lieutenant governor or the speaker in the respective chambers. So the bills all get filed, and then the lieutenant governor and speaker take each bill and say, this is going to criminal justice, this is going to state affairs, this is going to go here, this is going to go there. Now, they have to do that in order for the committee to then be able to take action on the policy. So as you can imagine, the slower the speaker or the lieutenant governor refer legislation, the slower their legislative body works as a whole, right? The Senate has referred 75% of the bills. To be specific, 74.96% of the bills filed as of yesterday had been referred to their respective committees. In the Texas House, that number is 10.5%, or to be specific, 10.49%. Only 359 bills of the 3,423 bills that have been filed had been referred. Concurrent resolutions, 27% in the House, 62% in the Senate. Joint resolutions, 87% of those have been referred in the Senate to their committee, only 4% in the House. So, total, just all of the things out there, the Senate has referred 75% of its items that it can refer, not like basic resolutions about, somebody's 50th wedding anniversary, but substantive stuff. And the House has referred 10.6%. Now, even yesterday, the House was referring more bills, which they will. They'll refer bills every single day. The question is how fast they will refer bills. And the reason I'll explain this is in the Capitol, I was talking to various different people who are still kind of finalizing their piece of policy with a particular office. Ledge Council was slower than usual, and so some of these legislators are just getting their drafts back and realizing this sentence doesn't do what I wanted it to do, this paragraph doesn't do what I wanted it to do. Now, the thing is, because the House is so far behind on referrals, if you file a bill this week or next week, ordinarily, if the House had been catching up and making an effort to refer as many bills as possible, then when you filed your bill next week before the deadline, that bill would still in a very timely manner be referred to the committee of proper jurisdiction so that committee could dispose of that matter if they so pleased. But if the House is working slowly through referrals, then you could file a bill next week and it could go multiple weeks before even being referred to its committee, which means the committee can't even take action on legislation that might have the support of the committee and a willingness to do it. So all of this sets up the House for being in a tougher position to accomplish what I still do believe can be accomplished, which is that the House can pass a lot of Republican policy, a lot of conservative Republican policy. And ultimately, that is going to be what people are judged by at the end of the legislative session, right? You can work more slowly in the first half or more quickly in the first half of session. I will tell you which one will be more helpful when it comes to advancing more policy. It's a rather obvious answer, but you still can get a lot of policy done in the second half of the session if you work quickly. The great thing about what you, the people of Texas, have done is that you have brought sunlight to this process. So never again can a committee chair just say, oh, I ran out of time. I didn't have time to move those 4 or 5 good Republican policies in my committee. Or the calendars committee say, oh, we tried. We just couldn't get to those issues, right? That's not going to happen again. We are not going to say in June, July, August, we ran out of time, because there have been countless legislators and conservative voices all across Texas saying we have to get to work. We have to get to work. Now, with that being said, what I actually would like to focus on today is, how are you going to get to work this session? Now, I'm going to go through a number of things that I think matter and are easy ways for you to engage in things you care about after a very quick break.
Hey folks, Chris Salcedo here. I've got something special for you, the Salcedo Storm podcast. As your friendly, liberty-loving Latino, I bring you a mix of engaging discussions to help us fight for our state and our conservative values. It's the perfect way to stay informed and engaged in what's happening around you. So, what are you waiting for? Don't miss out on the storm of information and entertainment coming your way. The Salcedo Storm podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
The very first thing I ever did in Texas politics, the very first thing, was go to a Capitol Days hosted by the Texas Homeschool Coalition. In 2005, I was 15 years old. My family hadn't done anything politically, and there was an opportunity. Texas Homeschool Coalition hosts these monthly gatherings for March, April, and May. Their March one is already booked. Their April ones are available. And so my dad and myself, and I believe both of my brothers at the time, my older brother and younger brother, one's 2 years older than me, one's 2 years younger than me, all head up to the Capitol. And for Capitol Days, you get to meet some lawmakers. You get to be told how the process works. They explain how a bill becomes a law. There's several other things they do. And then you go into the Capitol and your group meet with different legislative offices to talk to them about specific bills that matter for the Texas Homeschool Coalition. So I was 15 years old, right? And literally walking the halls of the Capitol, had never been in the Texas Capitol before. We met with 5 or 6 different offices, some in the actual Capitol building, which is really cool and historic and beautiful, and some in the extension, which also has its own really cool, just in my opinion, design and nature to the whole part. The Texas Capitol is built bigger than the U.S. Capitol. For those of you who do not know that, that's because we're better than everybody else, in case you forgot. So we build really big buildings, and then our Capitol is just better. It's probably the best Capitol in the entire universe. I don't know that there is a better Capitol than the Texas Capitol. So the Texas Homeschool Coalition hosts these Capitol Days. And the reason I tell you that is, so what we did not know at the time in 2005 is that it was going to be 5 months later, 6 months later, that somebody from our church would reach out and say, hey, Nathan, who's my dad. Hey, Nathan, what do you think about running for office, for state representative, to go be in that building that your kids just went in for the very first time 4 months ago? And then Dad decided to run, and he won. Here's the thing. There are a lot of organizations that host opportunities for you to go and engage in this process. And if you think it doesn't have an effect, I will just tell you that lawmakers right now, as I kind of explained in the forefront of this episode, lawmakers are working more slowly through the process right now. And in the Texas House, not in the Texas Senate, but in the Texas House. And what that does is it creates this potential logjam or bottleneck of conservative policy. And so every single month that more pressure is put on everyone to move the right policy forward, the less likely it is that all of that gets jammed up at the very end. And I'm going to go through a number of those different issues and how you can engage. The Texas Homeschool Coalition, of course, is an easy example. Now, March 11th is their capital days. It's completely sold out, but they have one on April 24th and they have one on May 7th. And you can go to events.thsc.org to actually engage, right? Now, secondarily, there's also Texas Gun Rights has specific lobby days that you can engage in. And if you literally go to txgunrights.org, there's a big thing at the very top menu that says lobby days, right? You can click on lobby days and you can see the different times they are taking people to the Capitol. And here's the thing. They've actually contracted buses on different days that if you want, you can go get on a bus for free and it will take you to the Capitol. You can be there to lobby on the gun issue, and then you can get taken back home, right? So on March 11th, they literally have buses from Corpus Christi and San Antonio, Grapevine, Kerrville and Fredericksburg, Frisco and Waxahachie. Pretty incredible day there. That's March 11th. April 1st, they have one just from Grapevine and Burleson. And on May 6th, they have one from Cypress and Brenham, right? So even if you don't want to get on a bus, all you have to do, which is what I did on my family, we just drove from San Antonio to the Capitol, just an hour and a half away. We just drove to the Capitol. We're there for the day. We participated in this process. We got more literature. You will see. So the more people participate in these, and I know a lot of these group leaders, they will tell you on the days that they have these groups come in, priority legislation of theirs will go from having 30 co-authors or 40 co-authors to 50 or 60 co-authors, right? And as I told you with Valerie Swanson's bathroom bill, once your bill gets to the coveted 76 number, it's much harder for House leadership to say, oh, this bill died, we ran out of time. They say, well, of course this bill has the votes to pass. Why are we holding it up in the process? And it moves a lot quicker. You can go to txgunrights.org, literally click on lobby days, look at the March 11th, the April 1st, the May 6th, and just decide to go one of those times. Just decide to go. Now, most of you are a little more involved in the process that listen to this show. Most of our listeners and viewers, in my opinion, do a little bit more than the average citizen. Okay. We do have people that watch this show that I run into, that I meet, and they go, you're kind of my source of information on what's happening in Texas, but I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of other stuff. Okay. So if that's you, hey, I'm still super grateful that you tune in. And of course I say this, I don't say it a lot, but if you share this show with more people, that's also a way of engaging people in the process. Just taking the show, emailing it to 4 or 5 people, taking the YouTube channel or the podcast. I know people talk about the podcast they listen to all the time with their friends and just say, hey, this is a good way to stay engaged. I try to keep this a little shorter in order to make sure that for people who do have busy lives, they can get the most important information and then kind of move on. So yes, that is one way you can engage in the process further. You could get more involved this session by saying, I'm going to take the Luke Macias show and I'm going to share it with more people I know in Texas and make sure that more people are tuned in and then that they're also taking the action. We'll talk about these different bills and then you'll be able to take action from there. By the way, if you think it doesn't have an impact when you call your legislator, if I talk about a bill on this show, if you, read about a bill in the Texas Minute, which if you haven't subscribed to the Texas Minute, that's another good example of how you can be more engaged. The Texas Minute is a daily email from Texas Scorecard. It gives great information. It might give you a story about a bill that's being held up in committee. It might talk about a bill that just passed the Senate or just passed the House that is good Republican policy that needs to pass the other chamber. It might talk about a particular policy that the governor recently came out and supported. Each and every one of those are opportunities for you to call your legislator and say, I just want to make sure that Representative so-and-so understands that we strongly support House Bill so-and-so, Senate Bill so-and-so. And then those offices do often take action on that, because what you don't understand is that then the staff are telling the legislator when he gets back, hey, we've gotten several calls about this bill. We just want to make sure you have time to read it. And without those calls, he has 3,400 bills he could read. He's on multiple committees. But the fact that they go, this one we've gotten talked to about it a lot. If we keep getting calls, it would be really nice just to tell people you sign on and support the legislation. Let's get this off of our back, right? And that's why you can take that action. You can also, I've talked about this before, and I'm going to get back to a couple other lobby days that are like Texas Right to Life and others have here in just a second. But one of the things I have found is that you should build a list of activists who you think will take action on any piece of policy that you care about. Okay. And you can literally tell them, hey, I'm going to send you, a couple times a month, just 4 or 5 bills that I really care about that I'm trying to move. And if you're talking to these groups and you went down in the lobby day, you could probably ask Chris McNutt, who's the president of Texas Gun Rights, what's the gun bill that needs the most help to push it over the finish line? Okay, great. Then let's say you have 5 or 10 or 15 people in your community that care. Or maybe they're not in your community. Maybe they're all across Texas, so they have different legislators. But you say, I'm going to send you an email and say, can you call your state representative and ask them to support these 3 bills? Here's a pro-life bill. Here's a gun bill. Here's a medical freedom bill. Texans for Vaccine Choice has legislative engagement days as well. So if you go to Texans for Vaccine Choice's website and just engage with them, reach out to them, say, I want to come to the Capitol. I care about medical freedom. I care about vaccine choice. I care about privacy. They will have great opportunities to share with you. Texas Right to Life has a lobby day. You can go to texasrighttolife.com/lobby day. LOBBYDAY. texasrighttolife.com/lobby day. If you go there, you can register. They also have one on March 11th. Texas Gun Rights and Texas Right to Life are both in the Capitol with a bunch of conservative activists across the state on March 11th advocating for conservative policy. It's a great opportunity to come. You could probably come register for both and do some gun stuff and some life stuff, right? So March 11th is a good one to look at. You need to do more this session. I promise you need to do more. And the reason you need to do more is because the Texas House is not operating as a legislative chamber would operate that is trying to accomplish as much as they possibly can. We know that. Okay. I don't even think there's room for debate on that issue. It's obvious they're not working like a chamber that's trying to accomplish everything they possibly can. They have 77 co-authors on the school choice legislation, which is a great bill, the ESA bill. Okay, in my opinion. Now, they had a hearing yesterday, and Brad Buckley has said that he does not want to vote that bill out for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So you have to understand, if this chamber was trying to accomplish as much as it possibly could, then it would get it done. It would just have the hearing. They can literally vote the bill out after they have the hearing, and they know they have the votes because a majority of the committee has co-authored the legislation. So they could say, well, we've heard everything we need to hear. Let's take a vote, and the bill could get voted out. The calendars committee the next day could say, let's put this on the floor. They could pass it out Friday of this week or Monday of next week or Tuesday of next week. And instead they're like, we're going to take a look at this in 2 weeks. Why? Because everything that gets pushed back pushes something else back as well. And that's why you need to engage more. Now, you might say, I don't have time or capacity to make a trip to Austin. So here's the other thing you can do. You can take one of these groups that you care about, Texas Right to Life on the life issue, Texas Values, Protecting Texas Children, groups like this on the family issues, Texans for Vaccine Choice, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Texas Gun Rights, Texas Homeschool Coalition. There's all sorts of policies that you care about, right? You could engage with these groups and say, I want to know what's going on. They will send you the bill alerts and say, this bill is stuck in committee. Sadly, it wasn't placed for a hearing. We only have 2 more weeks for this bill to be placed for a hearing in order to pass it. Please call Chairman so-and-so and tell him to set this bill for hearing. And you can make that phone call. And you can do that a couple different times. Or you can just take some language that they have and email it to that lawmaker. And I'm telling you, it has an impact when it happens more than once or twice or 3 or 4 times. The legislative staff start getting hit, and then they start passing on to their boss. This is an issue. The way I look at conservative policy in the Texas House is like a hot potato, often. This isn't every conservative bill. Don't get me wrong. There are some conservative bills that some of these guys like and want to pass. Things like, now they know China land, probably going to pass. A taxpayer-funded lobbying ban, going to pass. Like these things they want to do. But a lot of the other conservative policy is like a hot potato. And so the individual member that's sitting on it is like holding it until his hands are too burnt. And the more the hands start hurting, the sooner he just tosses it to the next person. And so what conservatives unfortunately have to do, and we don't actually have to do this in the Senate, the legislative chamber gets to decide how conservatives engage with them. Okay. One way is the way the Senate does it, which is basically posture from the beginning. We want to try to pass as much stuff as possible. We're going to get to work as soon as possible. And we're going to communicate to the conservatives in Texas, we want to pass as much conservative policy as possible. Okay. When they do that, there isn't as much of a need to come in and basically create tension over particular pieces of legislation because they're not holding on to this potato until it gets too hot, if you understand my analogy. And so in the House, that's how they operate, though. They don't move until they're pushed when it comes to the vast majority of conservative policies. So you take 100 conservative bills, the way the House looks at it, often has in the past, we'll have to see if they do this now, is that they will say, okay, we'll do 20 or 25 of them. Which 25 do we need to pass to have the best chance of getting reelected while also not having to pass the others so that the Democrats are still happy that certain policy didn't become law? And also, that's kind of our role as a chamber, is we act as like this brake to conservative ideas. Now, the way to do that is just to be a lot slower. That way, when it does happen, you go, I didn't intentionally ignore these policies. We just ran out of time. You don't believe they're going to run out of time. I know they're not going to run out of time. And the way we make sure that as much conservative policy happens as possible is for you to decide now that for the next several months, you're going to be a little more engaged in the process. And it might mean that you come to a Texas Capitol Days with the Texas Homeschool Coalition. And who knows, because somebody might reach out to you in 3 or 4 months at your church, like my dad had, and say, hey, have you thought about running for office? And all of a sudden, what became just a little trip to the Texas Capitol turns into you actually engaging in the political process at a new level. My hope, and why I want to encourage you to do this, is that more conservative policy will pass if you do. I do believe that. The more conservatives show up this session and continue to encourage the legislative bodies in that Capitol to pass more conservative policy, the more conservative policy will become law by getting signed by Governor Abbott. And that is the only reason why you and I engage in the political process. We don't engage in the political process to be somebody. We don't engage in the political process to have access to more people. We don't engage in the political process so that we can get more pictures with more cool politicians. The only reason to engage in the political process for me, and I believe for all of my listeners and viewers, because I just meet you all over the place, is that more policy would become law, that things that aren't currently in statute that need to be in statute would be put in, and things that are in statute that need to be taken out are taken out. I saw a video by Mike Alcott just last night. He posted it. You can go to his Twitter and follow him and share this video. He filed HB 3743, and it repeals a section of the government code that basically says state agencies have to have an 11-to-1 ratio of managers to employees. And there are some instances in which a manager can only manage 5 or 10 employees for a particular project. But there's also probably situations where a manager can manage 50 employees for a particular project. And it's kind of crazy that we literally have a mandated ratio in state law of 11-to-1. So Mike Alcott filed the bill that would remove that ratio. Great bill, easy bill. So sometimes conservative policy is putting good language in, and sometimes it's taking bad language out. And in both instances, I believe that's what motivates you. You're motivated by more conservative policy becoming law. And so that is why I wanted to encourage each and every one of you today to engage more in the political process. Go to a Capitol Days, go to a lobby day, come down. You could come down without a lobby day, okay? You could just come down. If there's some people you know in the Capitol, you could make a list of things you care about. You could drop off one-pagers in certain offices that matter. You could go meet with certain committees that are holding up legislation you care about and meet with those members and just say, I wanted to meet with your staff and tell you I really care about this bill, and here's all the reasons I care about this bill. That will have an impact too. The lobby days just offer an opportunity for you to be even more engaged in an organized way. And when I say an effective way, those groups know the legislation that is close to passing but needs to be pushed over the finish line. And they know how to take all the energy of the activists that come in and try to focus it in as effective a way as possible. So keep that in mind, and please consider doing that. If you do, I might see you, because I am in the Capitol several days a week at this time. And so I'm seeing various people. I'll run into y'all in the hallways and they'll say, oh, I listen to your show, or, oh, hey, I'm engaged in True Texas Project. Oh, I'm engaged in this group. And so love seeing y'all down there. True Texas Project also does engagement days. I think I forgot to mention that, but they have engagement days. They will often team up with these other groups that are pushing different policy and push their issues as well. So consider doing that. I hope y'all have a great week. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Be sure to subscribe to Texas Scorecard on YouTube and click that bell to ensure you're a real Texan. If you liked this video and want to see more citizen-driven journalism, be sure to click like and go to TexasScorecard.com to read about all things Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.